the speaker is Dr. Andrea from the University of Bristol. Andrea's been working in association with Brace for a long, long time, longer than I've been associated with Brace, and has pioneered research in areas which were unfashionable, I think I can say, and has done some really important stuff. She's from the Department of Experimental Psychology at Bristol. Sad to say she's going to move to Swansea University soon, so we shall see less of her, but I hope she'll stay in touch with us. Andrea, tell us about your work.
I'd like to give a little bit of context about my work to start with. We've heard from Rob about treatments. A really important aspect of treatment that we have now and the treatment that we're going to have in the future is being able to diagnose dementia in its very earliest stages. The earlier you can diagnose dementia and a particular type of dementia, the more effective any treatment and intervention and in fact any care system is going to be. The longer the dementing process goes on, the more damage is done and the more function you lose, you probably can't ever get back. A little bit of research background. We used to think that Alzheimer's disease was described as affecting only very specific aspects of brain function, what we call high-level function, things that you're aware of that your brain is doing. Some of these things help us plan what we're going to do and carry out our everyday lives, like going shopping or driving a car, and that's called executive function. The big thing that everybody notices in Alzheimer's disease and other forms of dementia is a change in memory. And most people go to their GP because they've noticed a change in their memory. We notice changes in what we call our cognition, that's our ability to think and to work things out. We notice changes in perception and language. All these are very important aspects of our behaviour. However, there's an argument to say, and some evidence to show, that by the time you notice changes in these aspects of brain function, Alzheimer's disease or other forms of dementia are already at quite a high level. And following on from that, we realise now that these, what we call diagnostic criteria, these are how dementia is diagnosed if you go to a clinic, don't actually fully characterise the disease process. They don't explain everything that's going on, and they don't explain all the signs and symptoms. We know now that other aspects of brain function are affected in Alzheimer's disease. And we're hoping that this knowledge about what else is affected in Alzheimer's disease, apart from the list that I gave you earlier, can help us detect that earlier. If we know what test to give, we have a much better chance of diagnosing dementia in lots of different forms at a much earlier stage. It's actually really very difficult to determine whether an older adult has dementia or not, because there's a phase we all perhaps notice as we age that our memory gets a little bit worse. It's very difficult to determine whether somebody is developing the early stages of dementia or they're aging naturally but they're a little bit tired and stressed, because we all change in terms of our memory and our language and our perception. And often a person can go to a memory clinic and be told, actually your memory is changing, lots of other factors are changing. You don't have dementia, but you have something that we call mild cognitive impairment. And for some people, a relatively small percentage of people, mild cognitive impairment actually is very early stages of dementia. But for a huge proportion of those people, it's not. And here we come to difficulties. If you tell somebody that, you might or you might not get dementia, it's a really very difficult thing to live with. So we've been looking at mild cognitive impairment, and we've been trying to look at other brain functions, other tests of brain function that can help to tell us whether mild cognitive impairment actually it's got a reversible cause, or actually whether it's a very early stage of dementia. Again, if we know that, we can start treatment even at the mild cognitive stage rather than at the dementia stage. I've mentioned diagnosis, and that's very important for treatment of dementia and prevention. There's also something called disease characterisation, and this is really important for care. Slightly different aspect of the research here. And the idea is that there's probably a lot more going on in the brain than we're aware of, and certainly more aspects of function that are affected from that list that I I showed you initially. If we can characterise a disease better, we can understand why a person might be behaving in a certain way, because we know a certain part of their brain is affected, that will affect their behaviour. And within a care setting, it may cause them to behave or react in a certain way, and we really need to understand that. We need to know that people with dementia don't just have problems with memory, there's lots of other issues, as I'll show in a moment. I mentioned earlier about differential diagnosis, prodromal disease indicators and treatment. This is quite a fashionable area now, and it's probably the case that drug companies will be quite interested in this area because they need to include these factors in their clinical trials. I mentioned earlier about non-converters. These are people with mild cognitive impairment who don't get dementia. There's huge ethical discussions going on about this, as I mentioned. The least fashionable area, probably, of dementia research is this disease characterisation, and it's about identifying previously unrecognised functional deficits. One of the major areas of problems that we found that people with dementia have, and people with mild cognitive impairment have, is attention. Attention is hopefully what you're giving me at the moment. And it's something that's hugely important for all aspects of our daily life. Without attention, we find it really difficult to take on board information, be aware of our surroundings, drive our car, go shopping. It's needed for, memory as well. If you can't attend to something, your memory won't work either. Also, visual processing, not necessarily perception, but the aspects of brain function that you're not aware of. They're very, very early stages of information processing. Really, really important. And we've found that lots of people with dementia and some people with mild cognitive impairment, sometimes the ones that are most likely to develop dementia, have real problems with visual processing. It's not the type of vision test that you go to your opticians about. It's other tests that we use to show function that you're probably not aware of. We know that these factors like poor attention and poor visual processing have real impact on your life. Driving becomes a problem if you can't attend or you can't process visual information. And also, people who have dementia and people who have mild cognitive impairment are at an increased risk of falling over. And if you're an older person and you fall over and you break a hip, there's a real risk of very severe complications about that. And we found that actually in people who have impaired attention and visual processing, the chance of you falling over are much increased. So that's a little indication of how attention is important in real life. Visual attention, it's just a little cartoon here, but it's a mechanism that allows us to selectively process only the important aspects of our environment. Now, imagine that you're in a care setting. You're going to have people within your care setting who can't process visual information very well. It's not just about reading, but some people, we've noticed, if there's a shadow on the floor, they will think it's a step, and they will step over it. The design of care environments really, I would dare to say, needs to take into account the fact that lots of people with dementia can't process visual information, they can't attend to things that healthy older people can do. If you have dementia, you're also highly likely to be distracted by lots of things that healthy people wouldn't be bothered by. So if you've got clutter and confusing signs in your